Okay, welcome back. This is Chapter 6. Chapter 6 is on analyzing data using tables. So, as always, turn to page 307 in the textbook and let's go over the learning objectives, what it is you're supposed to learn. Work with data and information in data tables. Okay, that was pretty simple. Use the subtotal function and filters in data tables. Hey, haven't we done that before? Develop and customize pivot tables. Ooh, there's some good stuff there. And develop and customize pivot charts. Okay, so kind of before we get into this, we really kind of need to talk up in general terms what they mean by a data table. Or how about this? What's the difference between just a plain old bunch of data in a row and a column? You know, what's the difference between, you know, John 12 and Sally 42? What's the difference between that and a data table? Okay, so here are the rules for a data table. Essentially, there has to be a header row at the top. Okay, so to make this work, I have to have something called, you know, like name and whatever this is, score. Okay, so that's a required feature. If you don't actually have heading across the top, it ain't gonna work. Also, the headings have to be unique. I can't have like two things called score, all right? That won't work. So I can only have one thing. So each column name has to be unique and has to have a header row. And by the way, oddly enough, that won't work. The headings actually have to be immediately, no blank lines in between. It's got to be immediately next to the data. Kind of cool. Now, not a hard and fast rule per se, but something you probably need to use consistently is if this is expected to be a number, you really don't want to have, you know, like, I don't know, 12 December 15 thrown in there in the middle. You know, even though that's not really a hard and fast rule, it's just good practice to use the same data type, strings, you know, text. So if it's text, leave it as text. If it's numbers, leave it at numbers. If it's dates or whatever else it is, just be consistent in the use of data types in a column. Okay, so those are the rules. On page 308, they talk about the difference between data and information. And so in general terms, the way I describe it is throw in some adjectives. If I said raw data and useful information, okay, that pretty much well distinguishes between the two. So raw data is that. It's usually sipping from a fire hose. It's tons and tons and tons of data, but there's so much of it that you don't have a clue what it all means. And it's like, yeah, I got some data. I don't know what it means. Information means, okay, I've done something with the data. I've cooked it. I've processed it. So now I have something useful. Aha! It looks like we need to open a second shift at the manufacturing plant. You know, that's real information. Okay, so just throw in some adjectives like raw data and useful information, and it becomes immediately clear. In the textbook, they talk about one of their examples, and we're going to use an example from the textbook. It's their goofy golf data. So I'm going to use this golf market data. And they have 200 rows of stuff. And they talk about what they probably did. They probably have a tremendous amount of data in a database someplace. It's not actually being held in Microsoft Excel at all. Perhaps it's an Oracle database or a Microsoft SQL Server database or something like that. And so they just pulled like a random sample, put it into Excel so they can play with it. Okay, now this is a very common thing to do because if I had, 5 million rows of data, I probably would not be trying to turn that much data into information. I'd probably like going to do a random sample to cut it down to something reasonable because, I don't need that much, and Excel really isn't well suited for doing, monstrously huge things like that. That's what databases are for. Okay, so the idea of extracting a random sample and putting it in Excel, that's actually a pretty good scenario they talk about. Okay, so on page 310, they talk about Okay, now I have. Now, is this a data table or not? How can you tell if it's a data table? That's actually a good question. It's sometimes hard to tell. The way I tell is I click someplace inside here. And if I don't get an extra little doodad that pops up, you know how we have these little tabs? If I don't have an extra little data table tools tab that pops up, then I know I'm not using a data table. Okay, so step one is I'm going to convert this to a data table. So I'm going to lasso the entire thing. So I'm just to include the header row. Remember we talked about data tables have to have a header row? Okay, good. Here's another, it's not necessarily a hard and fast rule, but boy, oh boy, is it a good one, is don't put spaces in your, these are now called, instead of just calling headers, these are now called fields. And again, it's good practice not to have spaces in your field names. Okay, so I'm going to grab this and drag all the way down until I get down to 201. Okay, now. So now that I've got it lassoed, I'm going to go to here where it says Insert, and there's a thing that says Table. Insert Table. Now, I'm not actually inserting a new table. It's going to look at that and say, ah, you mean to convert the stuff you got lassoed and make that into a data table? Okay, cool. So I'm going to hit the button, and it says, by the way, it looks like it's got headers. And I go, yep, certainly does. So I hit the button. Doink. Now, how can I tell I'm going to have a data table now? Because I got these table tool guys. One more time. I'm over here, and I say, I wonder if that's a table. And I click anywhere. Doesn't matter where. Doink. And if I get this little thing that pops up, I know I'm in a data table. Cool. Now, right off the bat, some of the goofy things they did, you could give it a name. When you go in here and designing one of these things, you could give a name to a table. I'm not really keen on names, so I'm going to skip that part. But look at some of the weird things that you can do. So I have it called Table 1, which is just fine and dandy with me. But you can go in here and do some, goofy style kind of things, banded rows, and all that kind of weird stuff. Again, just stuff that makes it pretty. A lot of people like that. I'm going to leave it back to whatever the default was. Was that the default? That's close enough. Okay. So, yes, you can turn on whether or not you want the filtering. Because right now, the filtering, whenever you create a table for the first time, it's going to assume that you want to do filtering. So all the little filtering arrows are up. That's fine. No big deal. But the banded rows. Now, because this is now a data table, I want to show you something really cool. For example, in the book, they talk about, let's say I want to calculate the tax. For this, okay? So I go here to a blank spot and I say tax and I hit return. Whoa. Now that was pretty cool. It automatically figured out that I wanted to add that to a table. Now if this was not a data table, this was just a plain old set of rows and columns, the rows and columns would have said, whatever, dude. No, I don't care what you're doing over there in the corner. Okay, so this is pretty cool because now it knows that's part. Now, what would be the tax? I'm going to do like E2 times 0.0825. Okay? So that'd be, 8.25% of that food order is tax. Okay, now, pay attention because this is pretty cool. I'm going to hit the button. Actually, I forgot to put the equal sign in there. Let's try that again. Now, wasn't that cool? What it basically did is it said, you put it in one location, and since this is a data table, that has to apply everywhere, so you didn't have to go there and grab the little autofill guy and go move him down, right? So that's actually pretty cool. I'm going to grab this entire column, and I'm going to change it to money. I like the currency version. So the guy spent $98 and he's got $8.09 in tax. Okay, cool. Now, I want to show you one more thing that is a little weird, so pay attention. All right, when I did this, I actually typed in E2. Okay, so I'm going to start over from scratch. And we're going to do this a little different. Instead of typing, because I don't like to type, I'm going to go click on this guy here and then type 0.0825. Okay, you guys see something strange already? Instead of having it come up E2, it came up with square bracket at square bracket food order? Like, where on earth did that come from? Okay. This is a field name. The field name. And it's almost equivalent to saying, you know, E2 and E3 and E4 all the way down the line. But this thing is called a structured reference. And again, if you're trying to compare this to just a traditional two-dimensional, you know, rows and columns kinds of thing, rows and columns are kind of dumb, and they can't quite figure out when things get added and moved and all the rest of that stuff. This knows that that's always going to be associated with that field right there. So it's just an alternate way of showing it. And this little notation with the square brackets and the @ sign and then the stuff in the middle, I know it's a little weird, but it's called structured reference. Okay. So let's talk about some changes in the way, up to now we've been using cell references, and typically our cell references have been, you know, we had the absolute address, and we had, you know, the relative address, and then we had, you know, mixtures where you could have it absolute in the horizontal or absolute in the vertical. So, you know, you could drop anchor on the up and down, or you could drop anchor on the left and right. So essentially mixtures of that. Well, there's more to it than that. I kind of sort of didn't go into it, but there's another notation. And this notation tends to come up a bit when you're doing this kind of work. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say something like, you know, equals, I don't want to pick what, like this. Okay, cool. So it says table 1, and then the square bracket, and then the @ and then the party size. So table 1 is that named range, because I didn't change the name of it. It just came up table 1. All right, so that is a pretty cool looking cell reference, isn't it? So if I ask you on a quiz, does that look like a valid cell reference? You're going to be able to go, yep, that looks like a valid cell reference. Okay, good, cool. There's another way you can do that, is that whenever you move from another sheet, okay, I'm going to go here. Whoops, sorry. I'm going to go here, and instead of picking a cell reference off of here, I'm going to go to this other sheet. Okay, now I started my equal sign here on this sheet called golf data. I'm going to go to golf report. Well, okay, whatever. And I'm going to hit return. Okay, now let's go back and look at that. Now I have something in single quotes, an exclamation mark, and then a regular cell reference. Okay. Now, isn't this getting a little weird? So we have regular cell references, you know, just the rows and columns. We have cell references with the drop anchor, the $sign. We have cell references that could be using the square bracket @ square bracket thing. And now we have cell references that use sheet names. Okay, so this is a combination. The sheet name is in single quotes. The exclamation mark separates the sheet name from the rest of it. And this could get complicated. Okay, in fact, let's go over here. Let's do this in reverse. I'm going to pick me a spot. I'm going to say equal, and now I'm going to go grab one of these guys that inside here. All right, now let's go look at that. Oh, okay. I didn't do what I was expecting. I was expecting it to repeat the whole thing and make this thing more complicated. You know, it would have the sheet name, and then it'd have the table name and all the rest of the stuff, but apparently it didn't do that. Shame on it. Okay, so bottom line is more different ways of doing references with the sheet name and without the sheet name. Kind of makes sense, huh? At least I hope it does. Okay, this is probably a good place to stop for the 15-minute mark. We'll pick this thing up again in just a few.